We're talking to Arthur Schwartz of Spring Lake, Michigan. The interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay, now start us off with some background on yourself, and to begin with, where and when were you born?
Oh, golly, December 28, 1921,
Okay,
in Detroit, Michigan.
all right. Now, did your family live in Detroit or outside the city?
No, they didn't. My mother was dead. Dad, who lived to be 105, by the way, was in Detroit for a short period, and he moved to Los Angeles sometime around 1950.
Okay. But in the meantime, I guess you said so did your mother die right after you were born, or when you were young?
No, she died around age 55.
Okay.
It was during the war. Actually, I was called home when she got the diagnosis of what they called at that time female cancer.
All right. So we're kind of beginning at the beginning. So you're born in Detroit, and then did you grow up in Detroit, or did you move around?
I lived in Detroit until I started attending the university.
Okay.
So,
And what did your family do for a living when you were growing up?
Dad was he was part owner of Heinz Bazaar, which was a ladies' store in Detroit, right across the street from J.L. Hudson Company.
Okay.
That didn't work out too well during the Depression, and Dad went into real estate. He developed a technique which has been widely imitated. He bought up plots of ground, acres of ground, 10 acres, and he had builders then who would build on that land. And with the war over and the boys coming home, the real estate market was very good.
Okay.
And these were smaller homes, two-story, two-bedroom type.
Right. Okay. But go back into the 1930s. Was that when he started doing that kind of development work?
No, he started that shortly after the war, probably 1945, 1946.
So during the 30s, then he was still with the department store.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And where did you go to high school?
And went on. I went on to Northern High School in Detroit, and graduated from there
In what year?
in 4 years. So I think it was 1944.
From high school?
Yeah. Does that sound right?
No, 44 is graduating from college.
Oh, yeah, you're
So
right.
maybe 1940?
Yeah, you're right about
Or
that.
39 maybe?
I was,
Or 40?
let's see, I was born in 21.
Yeah, but in December.
And which meant I would have started the following year. But if we figured that, say 18 years after that, that would be 39 or 40.
Yeah, okay.
So it would be about 1940.
All right. And then after you graduated from college, or from high school rather, you graduated from high school, did you go straight into college from there?
I did.
Okay, and where did you go to college?
I went into to the University of Michigan as a chemical engineer, and finished up in about 3.5 years due to the hurry up to get me out of there.
Okay. Now, I'm going to go back a little bit. Before Pearl Harbor happened, were you paying much attention to what was happening in the world? You know, there was a war going on in Europe, that kind of thing?
Oh, not a heck of a lot. I tell you, I was not as alert as a fellow that age should have been. I remember saying at one time, if Roosevelt ever declares war, I'm going to go down to Washington and shoot him. Well, now, of course, I'd be put in jail if I made that kind of a statement about
You might.
But fortunately, no one in authority heard my comment, so it just passed on by, and then all of a sudden we were attacked by the Japanese, and Roosevelt did declare war.
Yeah, but it was done to him first.
Mm.
All right. Now, how did you learn about Pearl Harbor?
Oh, I'm not sure. It was on a late Sunday. It must have been on radio. These were the days before TV, but I'm sure it was on the radio that I had heard it.
Okay. Now, after that happened, you're already in college by then.
Mm-hmm.
All right. How did people on campus react to that?
I'd say quietly. There wasn't much of a. There weren't many pep talks about kill the Japs, or it was a rather quiet period. Most of them didn't know what was going to happen to them. The war was going on. It wasn't a problem for me because I figured, well, I'm lucky enough through deferments and everything. I did get exemptions from the armed forces. So as soon as I graduated, it was my intention to join the Navy.
Okay. Now, was your deferment just an educational deferment, or did you have other reasons?
No, it was strictly educational, being as how it was an engineering degree that I was after. And that's an interesting comment too, because many of the fellows that did graduate at this time went off into industry, the oil industry as an example. They were crying for engineers to keep the oil pumping. And this really never occurred to me. It just seemed like our country was attacked, and it was the least I could do, since I'm physically able, to help defend our country.
Well, did you know anybody who was drafted while they were still in the middle of their college career, or were they able to wait until they graduated?
I don't really know. The university was such a big place that the areas of meeting people that you chose to be with was rather limited. So I don't know specifically of any. I know a lot of them flunked out of college. At that time, they figured 25% in the first 2 years, another 25% in the last year, and maybe a 50% graduation rate. So there were a lot of people that left. Now some of those may not have flunked out. Some of those may have been called into service through the draft, or changed their mind and figured that they should work towards their country rather than their education.
Okay. But in your case, you had a student deferment that allowed you to finish and graduate, and it may or may not be because you had a particularly useful specialization. I mean, the military trained a lot of extra engineers of various kinds because they didn't have enough. And if you were bringing in the degree already, then good.
Well,
Of course, they didn't use you that way.
this is true, and but I do know of many people. When you work in industry, you meet casually people, and I met a lot of people who went through college, got their degree through deferments, and many of them who left college and went directly into industry. So I know that that was part of the supply anyway that the armed forces worked through.
Right. Okay. So now, what branch of the service did you choose?
I chose the Navy.
Okay, and why did you pick the Navy?
It's just, I don't know really. Uh, I say now that when you consider the poor old dog faces that shave out of their canteen when there's enough water to do it, we had hot meals. We had a nice sheet-lined bed where the sheets were washed regularly. Had lots of hot water. Now, all of those things I didn't know at the time that that's what I was going to be getting.
Right.
That came as a plus. I just felt that I wanted to be in the Navy. The amphibious forces is what I asked for, and what they gave me, and I just felt that that was what the service that I wanted to be in.
Okay. Now, after Pearl Harbor, but before you went in, did you follow the news of the war more carefully now and pay attention to what was happening, or did you still just focus on your studies?
Mainly on the studies. There was very little activity. Of course, you had the in the movies, you had these news broadcasts before the main feature came on, and there was, of course, radio and newspapers, and so I suppose I looked at it on a much more casual basis, because whatever time I did have, and I did work, so time was limited.
Okay. What kind of work were you doing at that time?
Well, as an undergraduate, I worked in the dormitories for 2 years as a waiter, carrying trays of the food out to the tables of the people. I worked, drove a taxi for a while, worked at the Coca-Cola bottling plant for a while, and I suppose I did all kinds of things.
Okay. Now, did you need that just to pay your bills at that point?
That was pretty much the reason. The folks did as much for me as they could, and it really it did keep me afloat. But it was just something that I was a newsboy from the 8th grade right through high school. I delivered the Detroit News, and at that time that was an 8-day job. We couldn't quite squeeze an 8th day into the week, but there were 2 issues. Sunday was divided into a Saturday night issue and a Sunday issue. So there were really 8 issues that were released during that period.
Okay. So now, when do you finish college now?
Well, college would have been, must have been in late '43.
Yeah, so you're sort of a semester early, basically.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
The 2 summer semesters that I worked would have been equivalent to about a semester
Right.
early.
Okay. So you finish at the end of '43, and so at that point, do you tell Uncle Sam you're available, or?
I did. I went down. In fact, I'm not quite sure of the time sequence, but I do remember distinctly. Mom and I went down to J.L. Hudson's and bought my uniforms. There were the dress whites and of course the blues, and then the khaki chino shirts for the other 2 were more like dress uniforms.
Right. Now, most people, I think, probably assume that when you join the military, the government buys your uniforms. So why were you buying your own uniform?
I never did ask them if they were going to buy it for me. I know the enlisted personnel, their uniforms were supplied. I really don't know what their
No,
policy was
well,
with officers.
yeah, you were going in as an officer, and so
I
there was
I
a different policy.
Yeah, I was commissioned as an ensign, and Mom bought me the dress blues and the dress whites and the khaki work uniforms.
Right. Okay. So, and then kind of, was it be spring or summer of '44 when you actually report for training?
Yeah, it was probably sometime in early summer.
Okay.
I know I worked for a couple of months while I was waiting for this to happen. Why I remember, I don't know. The Panama Carbon Company. I was a delivery boy, and I also stocked the shelves
Okay.
with purchase material.
All right. Now, where did they send you for officer training?
Plattsburgh, New York.
Okay.
Way up in the tip of New York, just across the border from Canada.
And what did the training up there consist of?
Well, the first thing that we had to learn was the Navy alphabet. They didn't go ABC. They went Alpha, Beta, Charlie, Dog, Easy. Anyway, for each letter of the alphabet had a name, and you didn't say ABC. You said Alpha, Beta, Charlie when it came to any transmissions that you had. There was aircraft recognition, because you had to know what a Japanese warplane looked like, and also on the planes from the theater from the England area that might make their way over into the Japanese area. We had, of course, we had training in the bylaws of the United States Navy, things you can do and things you can't do. And then we had practice going up and down the rope ladders so that you could leave the mothership and dip down into one of the LCVPs, landing craft vehicle personnel.
Yes, indeed.
So we went through that training.
Now, at Plattsburgh, so did you have any of these landing craft or ships, on Lake Champlain or any place like that?
No, it would have been helpful, but we didn't.
Okay.
But we had mock-ups that we could work with, just so that we could be acquainted with them.
Right. Okay. Now, how much physical training did you get?
Well, there was all kinds of calisthenics in there, not punishing kind, like the Marines gave us.
Yeah.
But regular calisthenics, and I had a neat experience there. On one leave, I ran into a Canadian gal, and we got along so good that I said, "Hey, how about date next Saturday night?" And she said, "Sure." Well, I found out after I got back to base that next Saturday night I was going to be on base, not allowed to leave for whatever reason. And being more of an engineer or being more of an individual, I didn't take too kindly to that. So I promptly scouted around the perimeter of the camp, found a place where I could zip over the fence. And so that next Saturday, I had made arrangements with a friend of mine for the officer of the deck who guarded the bachelor officers' quarters. we had to be in the sack at 10 o'clock, and we had to be able to answer a bed call at that time. So I made arrangements with him that he'd fill in for me. And off we went, and we had a really delightful time. Came back maybe 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, jumped the fence, got back to the BOQ, walked in, and there was another guy that I didn't know from Adam sitting there, and my guy was sick and didn't turn up for work that day.
Oh.
So, needless to say, I was put on report and went before the commission or whatever they were, and my punishment for a week was to march back and forth from the headquarter building, coming to a rifle salute whenever I saw an officer, and then back to the rifle on the shoulder. This was a trying period. I managed to get through it somehow, but that was my punishment, and like Sinatra said, you know, I'll do it my way, and I'll take what comes along. That was a neat experience I had at Plattsburgh.
Right. Now, how long were you at Plattsburgh?
I think it was about 2 months.
Okay. All right. And then what did they do with you after that?
Directly transferred to the St. Mary's in San Diego.
Okay. How did they get you to San Diego from Plattsburgh?
Oh, I'm not sure if I had any leave. I don't remember whether I had any leave before then or not. The common mode of transportation in those days was by rail. And so I would assume that I went by rail from Plattsburgh to San Diego.
Okay. Now, but it would it just been like on regular passenger trains, do you think? Or do you have any recollection of being on a troop train?
I do not. I do recollect freight trains from San Diego to Los Angeles. I knew a family with a daughter about my age in Los Angeles, so I was up there quite a bit. And I do remember troop trains that ran back and forth from to Los Angeles to San Diego.
Okay. All right. So you get out to San Diego and you report to a ship called the St. Mary's. Now, what kind of ship was it?
This was an attack transport, and it was large enough. I don't remember 700 feet maybe, but it was large enough that it could handle about 1,500 sailors or Marines, along with the regular crew of the ship itself. It was a ship that was designed and built primarily for amphibious warfare. Take the boys into the beach and then get the hell back to the mothership.
Okay. Did the ship carry its own landing craft?
Oh yes, landing craft were stored above ship, clamped down regularly or steadily and firmly, and that was part of our cleanup duty. The officers and men who were in the amphibious forces, who were actually going to be involved in the runs into the beach. It was important that we really not just get acquainted, but we familiarize ourselves with the landing craft. So we had some exercises on getting them down into the water and back up onto the ship, and the rope ladder again into the landing craft and back up onto the mothership.
Okay. Now, was this a new ship, or had it already been in service for a while?
No, this was a new one.
Okay.
And this was this was the first crack it had at the war.
All right. What was your official assignment? What was your job on the ship?
Just as I was a, that doesn't sound right, a wave officer. I wasn't female, but a wave was, by definition, about 6 landing craft horizontally behind just slightly in front of them, the ship or the boat that I was in charge of as the officer in charge of that wave.
Okay. So you were supposed to be there on that landing craft going in with them.
Oh yes.
Okay.
And incidentally, which makes it interesting too, this was, remember, in the early days, we didn't have such things as pocket information radios. We used semaphores, and if you wanted to send a message to your the other boats in the wave, you had to do it by semaphore, and they would receive it that way.
Okay. Now, semaphore as in waving flags or with blinkers or?
And waving flags.
Okay.
Absolutely. Red flags. Each position, Alpha, Beta, Charlie, Dog, Easy, Fox, George, so on. Each position of the arms was a letter of the alphabet. And we used that as a form of communication between the boats in the wave.
Okay. About how many men would you load into a landing craft if you're bringing infantry in?
Well, it's hard to say, because sometimes we wouldn't have the big tanks in there, but we would have smaller vessels, which of course would limit the number of men, but generally about 40 men.
Okay. But if you had a jeep or a weapons carrier or something like that, that would take up some of the space.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Now, roughly when did you get to San Diego, do you think?
Oh,
Now it could be done a late summer 44?
yeah, I would say it would be around the late summer of 44.
And do you have a sense of how long you spent in San Diego before you went to sea?
Not too long, as I remember, maybe a month, which was quite important too, because I knew nothing about ships, and get lost getting to my own stateroom. But stateroom, by the way, was four officers, junior officers.
Okay. How many officers were on the ship?
I don't really know. I would guess something in the magnitude of 15 to 20.
Okay. All right. Do you remember your captain at all?
I remember my captain quite well, because he and I didn't get along too well. Nevertheless, he was the captain, so, but there was one instance, I don't remember what I did, but I had done something that upset the old man, and called me in to chew me out, and also to inform me that I would have to dissolve the poker club that I had arranged in the wardrobe for when we were not on duty, when we were not looking for subs and that sort of thing. But that was my punishment. And I don't remember what I had done.
So he wasn't upset about the poker group. He was just punishing you by disbanding.
Oh yeah, it upset him terribly that I could do it anyway. So I said yes, sir, and I left and immediately organized a bridge club. So
All right.
he grew to hate me even more. Well, hate's a rather strong word, but let's say he disliked me a little bit more.
Yes. All right. Now, when you leave port, when you leave San Diego, where do you go from there?
Well, we went down to toward Australia, down to New Guinea.
Mm-hmm.
We brought in a load of food and beer, which we had to offload into the port. I don't remember the city in New Zealand, but anyway.
Well, there's New Zealand or New Guinea.
I'm sorry, it was New Zealand, yeah.
Okay, because New Zealand's a nice civilized country, and New Zealand's a nice civilized country with British people on it, as opposed to New Guinea, which is this big jungle island.
That is true.
Okay, so you went to New Zealand first?
And to further expand upon that, that was the first time that I had run into things such as British armed forces.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't get over. They're running around in shorts. Well, in the U.S. Navy, that was verboten. You wore pants. You didn't wear shorts. Mm-hmm. And I just couldn't. I was really shocked when I first encountered this in New Guinea. They had a large contingent of the British there. But we came down and offloaded, and using our landing craft, we transported stuff into the beach.
Mm-hmm.
And
okay, well that's going to be New Guinea, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, well, no, that's New Zealand.
New Zealand. Okay, you landed at the beach, not in the port. I guess you've got an APA, you've got an assault ship, so I guess that's what you landed with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and we docked somewhere just outside of the harbor.
Okay.
And we loaded up the landing craft and started making trips back and forth into the beach.
All right.
Getting rid of what we brought them,
Okay.
which they were delighted to have, by the way.
And did you get to stay on shore for any amount of time, or just get back on the ship?
No, right back on the ship.
Okay.
And we, which wasn't really all that bad, because being an offbeat kind of chap, I saw all these cases of beer going into the shore. Some of them never made it. The landing craft was a double-hulled ship. It had an airspace between two metal parts of the hull, and a big manhole. I don't know, a couple 24, 36-inch diameter manhole with 106 bolts on it. I asked the coxswain one time, I said, "Boats, do you have a crescent wrench?" And he said, "Yes, sir." I said, take that manhole cover off." He did. And we stuffed as many cases of beer as we could inside the hull, put the manhole cover back on. So we had a supply of beer for those nights when we were in New Zealand and were unable to go ashore. We'd clamber up into one of the boats and get together for a little beer fest and a little chatter. Same when we left New Zealand and went on to the Philippines. We had very pleasant evenings when we weren't on duty with our supply of beer.
Now, was there a lot of fraternization between the officers and the enlisted men in a ship like that, or because you're talking about or just when you're on the landing craft with crewmen?
Yeah.
But when
there was still a yes sir, no sir type thing. But no, it was a very friendly relationship. In fact, when we crossed the equator, going down to New Zealand, we had a, oh golly, what was his name?
King Neptune, probably.
King Neptune. To join the King Neptune Club. And we had the initiation where we had to do silly things. It didn't matter what your rank was, everybody was equal on those things. And so my turn came, and they they thought this would be fun. They cut off half of my mustache. So, being an ornery sort of guy, I said to myself, okay, fellas, you cut it off. That's the way it's going to stay. So from then on, until just before coming home, a year or so later, they did it to me. They had to look at it. I walked around with half of a mustache.
How did your captain respond to that? Or did he never say anything?
No, he never said anything. After all, that he was the captain, and he didn't think that. Well, he thought that would help the morale on the ship by going through this initiation type thing. So he accepted that in good faith.
Okay.
And I was sort of new aboard ship at that time, so I hadn't really had any time to get into trouble.
Okay. Now, often when people first go to sea, they get sick. Did you get seasick when you first left the States, or?
No, I was lucky. I don't know that I've ever been seasick. There's occasions where I should have been, but I don't recall it. I do recall it affecting my eating habits. I couldn't look straight at a slice of bacon, but other than that, I didn't eat as much during rough weather. But it seemed to stay under control.
All right. Now, when you went to New Zealand from California, did you stop any place along the way, or was that straight
No,
through?
that was, well, it's straight. It was zigzag.
Yes.
It was zigzag to throw off the subs.
Okay.
Now, I don't know that submariners usually are pretty bright guys. I don't think the zigzag would have affected them that much, especially since we seem to have a pattern. We'd go a certain number of minutes, and then we would change for the same number of minutes, and we'd change again for the same. Anyway, we'd be changing at the same period of time each time we zigged and zagged. So that would have made it a little more difficult for the subs, but not too much.
Okay. Now, did you sail by yourself, or were you in a convoy?
No, we were by ourselves.
Okay. So was this a reasonably fast ship? I mean, could it go faster than the subs, or?
No, I don't know. The subs never did go very fast, and neither did we. We were, I don't know, 15 miles an hour, 15 knots.
Knots, yeah. So, but I guess at that stage in the war, there weren't as many Japanese submarines as there used to be. There still were some, though.
Oh, yes, there were still some. And we were on constant observation. There were officers and crew members that was what they were assigned for a 4-hour period to scan the waters and look for these things.
Now, did anybody ever see a submarine?
Not on our way down to
Not to New Zealand, yeah, okay.
New Zealand.
And then from New Zealand, you go up to the Philippines next?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was that trip like?
It went fairly calmly. The weather was good. We had lots of fun in our landing craft in the evening hours under the stars, and it was a rather romantic period. I'd say it was a pleasurable trip.
Okay. And now, did you go again by yourself, or were you with other ships now?
Again, by ourselves.
All right. And on that trip, did you see any Japanese?
No.
Okay.
No, we didn't. We were sort of doing mop-up work on the Philippines for straggler bunches of Japanese. They'd have to bring troops in, to dig them out. But I didn't see any.
Okay. So were you carrying troops with you this time, or were you just carrying cargo?
Only cargo.
Okay. So where did you go in the Philippines? Where did you land?
We were in Manila,
Mm-hmm.
and the harbor in Manila, you couldn't really get into the harbor. There were so many ships that were sunk in the harbor, and their masts were, all of them, above the surface of the water. You could almost walk across the harbor because so many ships had been sunk. So we didn't. So again, it was landing craft into the beach. We did have one day of R&R on the island, and the bars and houses of ill repute were all doing good business with the United States Navy there. But that was, I don't know how long that was, but it must have been a month from the time we left San Diego. It must have been, I don't know, maybe 2 months before we got to the Philippines.
Right,
So,
because you had to stop in New Zealand first,
Yeah.
and then getting up there.
so the R&R was well received,
Mm-hmm.
and had a good time ashore.
Okay. Now, after this, do you move back and forth in the Philippines, or do you get ready for something bigger?
We definitely, when we finished up in the Philippines, and this was a short period, a matter of weeks,
Okay.
we did move to an area where we reinforced our training for the invasion of Okinawa.
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting thing, well, at that point I was transferred to the LST, which is a marvel of a landing craft. It rocks side to side, and it also rocks up and down. So if you're ever going to get seasick, it's going to be on one of those little things.
Mm-hmm.
But we took that up there. They just needed an extra officer. Someone got sick and had to go on shore to a hospital. They needed an officer, so I got recruited, and the result being I didn't really have any chores to do. So there was a degree of boredom involved. There was a lot of poker, mainly in the evening, between the Army personnel who were the ones that would be going into the beach, and we had. I made out quite well, as I remember. I think a lot of it perhaps affected the thinking of the dog faces. They probably figured that a lot of them were going to get killed anyway, so they didn't worry so much about how you should play poker and how they felt at the time. But we had some very pleasant evenings, just playing poker and talking, drinking back and forth.
All right. And so did you do practice landings with them, where you brought the LST up to a beach, or?
No, we had them before we left the Philippines. We had gone through part of our training was they too had to get functional with these rope ladders that move in all directions at the time you're going up and down. So we did have training in that aspect of it. But once we got to Okinawa, then we were lined up to hit the beach, and we were briefed on which beach we would hit, and given the course that we would follow from the mothership into that particular beach.
Right. Okay. Now, at the time of the landing on Okinawa,
Mhm.
were you still on the LST or were you back on the St. Mary's?
No, I'm back on the St. Mary's by then.
All right.
Mhm.
So now we get to against April 1st, 45 is the beginning of the invasion. What was it? What was your impression of the invasion fleet? Could you see much of the other ships or hear the bombardment?
Yes, indeed. The aerial bombardments, the guns on destroyers and carriers, and could really lob some big things into the beach.
Mm-hmm.
And it put on the night before the invasion. I do remember. It was showtime. I mean, it was like a fireworks back home. You could see these things lighting up the sky,
Mm-hmm.
and in fact, that night, for whatever reason, I don't know why the old man, he had a cabin up near the flying bridge, and he didn't use that any time. And I figured, what the heck, I'll just go on up there and watch the fireworks for a while and then go to bed. I instructed my coxswain that, boats, I'm going to be in the old man's stateroom way up there. Be sure you come get me, because I wouldn't want to miss the invasion. So he did. He came up and banged on the door and woke me, and off we went onto the invasion.
All right.
One thing going up on that trip up on the LST, we had radio contact from the shore, specifically Formosa,
Mm-hmm.
which is now
Taiwan.
Taipei,
Yeah.
or Taiwan, yeah. And Tokyo Rose was headquartered there, and she was telling us from the time that we were training off the Philippines, that they knew all about it. The invasion was coming, and we were going to invade Formosa, and we're waiting for you. Well, I imagine they were awfully embarrassed, or felt pretty bad when they saw us not stop at Formosa, but keep right on going up to Okinawa.
All right, so you got one on Tokyo Rose. Okay. Now, what do you remember about the day of the landing itself? What did you see? What did you do?
It was fairly peaceful. We had not met much of resistance on the beach.
Mm-hmm.
It got more so as we moved inland, but it wasn't anywhere near like the invasion of France.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that was bloody. This wasn't bad at all. I went in with the guys, and I went into the beach with them.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I wasn't supposed to, I was supposed to stay aboard the little LCVP. But I went in with them, and one of the destroyer's 5-inch shells landed a little bit short of where it should have, and then it punctured my eardrum. So that was my big war wound.
Mm-hmm.
So when I got back on ship, I went down to see the doctor and to see if this is anything that needed treatment, or. So he looked it all over. He said, "No," he said, "you got a nice puncture there." He said, "You're fine." He said, "You're lucky, really." And I said, "Well, how do you figure that?" He said, "If there had been any poison gas in an area where you were, it would have entered your ear, gone right into your head and killed you. So that was the medical response to the to my punctured eardrum.
All right.
But yeah, the landings were they were time consuming. You know, as you load them and into the beach, you unload them, you go back, get another load, and you go through the same thing again. And but it was relatively peaceful when we hit the beach.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't much of a reception from the Japanese at that point.
Mm-hmm.
It was interesting because this was the eastern shore of Okinawa. We had we were instructed, and the admiral probably contacted the captain. We were instructed that we were to pretend that we were getting ready to launch an attack on the west side of the island by loading up LCVPs with cooks and barbers and all kinds of non-combat people, load them on the LCVPs and carrying around the tip and down onto the west side. That may have had something to do with the fact that, you know, there wasn't that much resistance on the beach itself.
Well, the Japanese plan was just to defend the southern third of the island, and they didn't defend the beaches directly.
Mm-hmm.
So there was not a lot of opposition on land except for that part.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
But
right.
in the meantime, you were doing your decoy
In
operation.
the meantime, yeah, the decoy operation pulled a certain number of troops over to the other side of the island.
Okay.
No question about that.
Now, how long did you stay in the waters around Okinawa?
Quite a while, actually. And there were two events that got to us on during that period. One was the ships themselves, and there were many of us. We had about 5 ships in our group, steaming sort of in a diamond shape. And we were attacked by kamikazes. About 4 of the other ships were around us were sunk, and they missed us completely. We shot one of them out of the air. Our gunners did. But I learned something that day, because when the attack started, I was immediately heading for the forward elevated gun tub. These were up on the bow on either side. As I ran to get there, there were bullets pinging off of the superstructure, it seemed like all around me. And yet, I never thought about it. No, my thought was getting to the gun tub and getting the guys going on it, and getting it, firing away at these kamikazes. And I never even thought about the fact that bullets were bouncing off the superstructure as I was running through it. But the other thing was, later we were docked in the harbor of Okinawa, and weather was coming. The old man decided, yeah, we better get out of here. So we hauled up the anchor, cranked up the screw, and started moving out of the harbor. The only difficulty was we were moving backwards. the tornado apparently had increased its speed appreciably, and hit the harbor sooner than it was expected. And so we were going finally, regular speed, full speed. Finally, the old man yelled out, "Crank speed," which is throw everything in there, shoes, socks, anything. Get us out of here. And finally, the screw did take hold, and we were able to move forward through the typhoon.
Typhoon, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what was it like to be on the water in the middle of a typhoon?
Very scary, very scarily. We were rocking and rolling, and the wind was blowing. And at the beginning, of course, we had no control. We were going backwards toward the beach. But other than the rough sea, once we got going, the idea was to get beyond where the storm ended, and which we did do.
Okay. How long did that take?
Oh, a matter of hours.
Okay.
4 hours.
All right.
But pretty rough weather during that period.
Okay. Now, you'd mentioned the kamikaze attack before. When the other ships got hit, did your ship help? Did you help rescue the people who went from those ships, or were there other ships that did that? Or?
Yeah, there were other ships especially designed to handle this sort of rescue, and specifically the ones that were a little bit closer to the water. We're on the same areas. We're well up above, I don't know, 10, 12 feet above the water layer, which makes rescue that much more difficult.
But they're not having you lower the LCVPs down to the water and use them like motorboats or anything.
Yeah, that's right. And it's just time consuming, and they had other boats available whose main purpose was rescue.
Okay. How close did the kamikazes get to you?
Well, fortunately, they didn't get close enough to hit us. And then, like I say, I know of one of them that we shot down. Maybe there were more, but it's scary because you see these things coming at you and they're shooting right at you. And if they're close enough to shoot at you, if you don't shoot them down, they're going to hit you. And so you're concentrating with the guns in your gun tub, keeping them going.
Now, did this only happen on one day, or were there different attacks?
This was the only attack that we had.
Okay.
In the Okinawa operation, yeah.
All right. Now, were you still in the Okinawa area when the war ended, or had you moved on someplace else?
Yeah, pretty much. We steamed up toward. We were scheduled to be at the signing of the peace treaty in Tokyo Bay, so we had to steam up there, which took some number of days to get there. But we were in the harbor, Tokyo Harbor, and I'll tell you that was scary too, because if Harry Truman hadn't authorized those the atomic attacks on the two cities in Japan, the Japanese would have blown us out of the water if we had attempted to work our way into Tokyo Harbor. It was a long miles and miles and miles of inlet, very narrow and very well fortified. Guns, cannons on either side pointing down, and we'd have had no chance.
Yeah, I don't think that was part of the invasion plan.
Mhm.
They were landing somewhere else. Was your ship designated to be part of the invasion of Japan, or did you do any preparation for that?
It hadn't gotten that far yet, or at
Okay.
least what we knew.
Right.
We were just to refresh our landing techniques and and be ready for a go at it.
Okay. Now, do you remember hearing about the dropping of the atomic bombs? Did they announce that at all, or?
I don't honestly remember. I know because we were in training at that period, and I don't really recall how much information we got on those two bombings.
Okay.
Or as far as that goes, Jimmy Doolittle's raid into Tokyo, just with conventional bombers. I don't remember hearing too much about that.
Well, that was way back in 1942.
Yeah.
So you were still
It
back
was,
in Michigan in those
was,
days.
But,
So the big news for you would have been the actual announcement of the Japanese surrender. Okay, now what was the response when that happened?
there was cheers and hollering and yelling and screaming. All kinds of things were leading up to that. Around ship, talk like the Golden Gate by 48, and these kinds of slogans, and figuring that around then the war is going to be over and we're on our way home.
All right.
But yeah, there was much excitement.
Okay. So you go to Tokyo Bay. Did you just go in and then leave again, or did you land someplace?
Yeah, we did. We just dropped our screws, our hooks, and we stayed there for the train. We had to get there early, of course, because we never knew the exact time that all of the bigwigs are going to be there. So we were there ahead of time. But boy, oh boy, oh boy, ships in that harbor, you could hardly maneuver. There were so many ships there. But we were there and happy to be there.
Right. Okay. All right. Now I was asking you what happens after Tokyo Bay. Where do you go next?
What formed Navy-wise was the magic carpet duty. Now, the magic carpet duty was the operation that brought sailors, soldiers, some sailors, Marines, who had enough points to leave the service to get them back to the States. So we would load the ship up, take off for the States, drop them off, come back, get another load, and drop them off.
Do you have a sense of how many times you did that?
I don't really remember. I know it was probably somewhere around 2 or 3.
Okay.
But by then it was getting to the point where I was eligible. So I don't know how much longer it lasted after I had left.
Okay. Now, did you sail just from Okinawa back to the States, or did you stop in other places?
As I remember, it was right straight through.
Okay.
And we're an interesting story. On one of those trips, we were heading into Los Angeles. We got maybe 100 miles from Los Angeles, and the bearing on the main drive shaft burned out.
Okay.
So we're dead in the water, and along comes a destroyer, picks us up, tows us into San Francisco, because the port in San Francisco had more repair facilities than the one in Los Angeles. The story goes that the reason this was done this way was because the old man had a girlfriend in San Francisco, and he more interested in seeing her than he was seeing his wife in Los Angeles. But regardless of whether or not that was true, I have no idea. but it was interesting because much later on, when I was with Parke-Davis in the Holland plant, we had a bunch of Japanese coming over. They were in the process of signing an arrangement for making a brand new wide spectrum, broad spectrum antibiotic, the only one that was ever made, I guess, synthetically. And I do remember asking them at the time, we were sitting at lunch one day, and I said, you know, you tell me, a couple of years ago we were shooting at each other. How's that going to affect our relationship? Well, their philosophy turned out to be much the same as mine. The war's over now. Let's get on with our lives and careers and do what we can in these areas.
Okay. Now, in terms of getting on with things, when did you leave the Navy, at least active duty?
I was released from active duty. I don't remember the date. I think I may have.
The notes in here indicate like maybe April of '46. Let's see.
Okay, well, okay, that's as good as any. I must have got that off of my. I got a couple of little cards that I carry around.
All right. So once you were out, what did you do next?
But I went back. I took a few weeks off, and then I had I'd forgotten this, but just while I was waiting for my deal at Plattsburgh, I did have some time with Parke-Davis. As a chemical operator, not as an engineer, because I had no experience. So my thought was, I'm back now. I've decided I'm going to work for 3M across the pond. But I did work with you guys for a while, and I just want to let you know that I survived, and I'm home, and glad to see y'all again, and bye-bye. Well, I never got to say that. They were so happy to see me, they threw their arms around me and said, when can you start? And, you know, so I ended up starting there. It was July of '46. And so that's what I started doing after the war. And worked with Parke-Davis for 24 years. Another year I'd have gotten a watch, but they were, unbeknownst to those of us peons, they were negotiating a deal for selling the company to Warner Lambert. So I was fired along with 16 or 1900 other people, as the company started to get as lean as it could, and less expenses, and so that my 24 years ended at that time.
So what did you do after that?
I rattled around. There was a bit of a recession going on then, and the chemical companies, pharmaceutical companies, weren't doing a lot of hiring. So I did rattle around for a couple of years, or maybe a couple. I don't know, maybe 1 year, or maybe a year and a half or so. I don't know. Doing consulting work as a consulting engineer, and working mainly with attorneys who had cases, you know, in that area. And I did that until I was offered an opportunity to join a small, just starting out chemical company here in West Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
And so I joined them.
All right.
And spent about 5 years with them. Interesting. I'd never considered myself as a president of a corporation, but suddenly I found myself as president of this company. And I had a tax loss carry forward of some $375,000. One day, maybe a year and a half after I joined the company, the vice president of finance of the parent company came to me and he said, "Art," he said, "we got to pay income tax this year." And I said, "Well, you're not excited about this, are you? I mean, doesn't this mean that we're making money? We apparently have used up our $375,000 tax loss carry forward, and now we're paying taxes." But that was pretty much the way that company worked, I guess. I had gotten into bed with a company in Rhode Island, and we worked well together. They had a tremendous background in sales, marketing, and R&D. No knowledge of production. And my company had a very good production facility, was a production facility, and no marketing and no R&D. So this was a perfect match, and we were both making money like crazy. Well, our guys decided that that wasn't enough. They wanted to institute a marketing program and an R&D program. And I told them, no, we don't have the resources to do that. We don't have the money, we don't have the people to do this. It takes years and years to set up those kinds of programs. We're going to set up a program for marketing and R&D. And I said, no, we're not. So they fired me. Interestingly enough, and brought a nice chuckle from me. 6 months later, they went bankrupt. But I, in turn, moved on to this company in Rhode Island. I had called them the day that I was fired and told them that they'd be dealing with another person now because I'm no longer with them. And their head man, Dr. Chada, said to me, you be here Monday. We'll work out the details when you get here." And I said, "No, Dr. Chada, I tell you, it's coming off of winter, and I'm just gonna find a spot that's full of sunshine, and me and my darling are gonna soak up some sun and just relax." And he said, "You be here Monday. You can lay in the sun later." So he said, we've got a team from a company coming in that has a new product that they want made, and we don't have the facilities to make it. And I'm sure that your company could have, but now that they can't, you get here and let's talk before these guys get here to see if you think we can scrape together a manufacturing plant. So I said, oh, all right. So for, I don't know how long it was, 4 months maybe, I was flying to Rhode Island on Monday morning, flying back Friday afternoon. This was going on for 3 or 4 months. A trying period, but nevertheless, we took on this project, and we did make a bundle out of it. So that worked out real well. I never did get the opportunity to go lay in the sun.
Oh, well. All right. Now, I guess to look back now, how do you think your time in the military affected you? What did you learn from it, or did you change at all because of it?
I learned one very important thing, and we haven't touched upon this, but when I was relieved from active duty in April of '46 or whenever that was, I joined the active reserve. This was in Detroit. And I stayed with that for about 4 years until we opened a new plant in Holland to make this synthetic antibiotic. And so I came across the state as the assistant production manager to run this plant. We had no facilities, no reserve training facilities anywhere near us. So I resigned my commission at that time. Now, one of the tours of duty, every year you had to take a 1-week tour of active duty. 1 year, 2 years actually, 1 year down in Orange, Texas, they were putting on a full court press to get as many of us as possible to sign over into the regular Navy. And I didn't sleep much that last night there. And then I finally decided, nah, that this life isn't for me. Your personal life and your professional life are all tied together. And if the commander's wife throws a party, you go, whether you want to or not. And your wife goes with you, whether she wants to or not. And I got to thinking, I just can't live like that. So I decided that what I learned was the major difference between living in the armed forces versus the private industry. And that was a big lesson for me, because there were things that are offered in the armed forces that are good. And I'm a young engineer, no, on the move maybe. We've got a new plant going in Holland that I'm a part of, but I don't have much in the way of experience that I've got to offer. On the other hand, in the Navy, I've got all I need, and I'll get regular promotions if I don't get court-martialed before them. And it would be a secure life and a good life, but not for me. So that was the major thing that I got out of the service. The experience of living under the conditions of the naval service. One thing too, if we go way back to the Philippines, we were on the other side of the island at one time, and Subic Bay, I think. We had a leave for a day, and we went into shore to the officers' club there, which was beautiful, thatched hot roofs and just beautiful music, and had a wonderful day. Well, we're coming home in the LCVPs. The ladder was down the side of the ship when we got there to exit the landing craft, and I had to go real bad. So the ship, the landing craft pulls up to the ship, and whammo, I'm on the ladder and up the ladder and into the men's room. The head, as we sailors call it.
Right.
And sailor comes in, he said, Mr. Schwartz, the executive officer wants to see you immediately. I said, okay, I'll tell him as soon as I finish, I'll be there. So I go in to see him, snap to attention. Sir, reporting as you requested. He said, your departure from the landing craft just now. Do you know in naval regs that the highest ranking officer is the first one off of the landing craft up onto the ship, and the rest of them go in order of their rank? I said, no, I don't remember that. He said, as your punishment, you will write me a report on naval regulations. Yes, sir. So, being a big bucket, big ship, we had a pretty nice library. So I did some research, the best that I could with all of the available books. And I wrote a very nice 3 or 4 page report, presented it to him. He looked at it. I could tell by his face what he was thinking. I had given him a report on all of the naval regs regarding personnel that were no longer being used. Well, needless to say,
So the executive officer doesn't like you that much either.
he didn't like me that much either. But that would be one of the things that, I learned. You gotta obey the rules. You gotta do things right, of course, and that's important. So put those two things together, and I'm staying with Parke-Davis.
Very good. All right. Well, it makes for a pretty interesting story, so thank you for taking the time to share it today.
Well, I'm glad I had the opportunity.